This is Gresh from the I Am CEO podcast. I have a very special guest on the show today. I have Brian Hart. Brian, excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Pretty excited to write about you and looked up some of your episodes. I'm a big fan of this song. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely a fan of you as well, too. I always say it's really great to have other podcasters. We're speaking the same language here. So excited to hear a little bit more about what you do. And obviously, we're recording live at Intelligent Office in Alexandria. So super excited. We get to not only record, get to meet you, but we get to do it in person, which is like the icing on the cake.
Exactly. So I always try to record live too. I prefer that. But obviously, we have our mistakes and got to be able to edit them out when they need to be. So we'll see how well this goes. And hopefully, I don't make too many mistakes for you and it'll be an easy operation for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I always say I make more mistakes than anybody, so it's a race to the top, I guess you could say. So
that's how we learn.
Exactly. So I guess to kind of kick everything off, I wanted to rewind the clock, hear a little bit more about you, what you're doing, and what led you kind of get started with it.
Okay, so I got started in Wall Street back in 2003. I had left Richmond, Virginia, moved to New York City. I had a rough growing up, lots of insanity, let's say that. So I had to get out of Richmond and then move to New York, of all places. That seemed quieter.
Right.
Believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
So I went to New York City because I didn't know anyone. It was a fresh restart. And I started my first job as a ticket sales in Times Square. If you've ever been to Times Square, you've seen the guys say, buy a ticket, buy a ticket. Yeah. That was me. I was annoying you, chasing you down, promising you to see Jerry Seinfeld, which we both knew he wasn't going to be there. So, but either way, that was the goal. And then I read a newspaper and they were hiring on Wall Street, 44 Wall Street, E1 asset management for cold callers. So I went down there and figured, what the heck at this point? What do I have to lose? I was more than shocked that they hired me on the spot because I didn't graduate college. I don't have the background a lot of people have, especially in finance. So I started from there and built my empire up from there.
Nice. I absolutely love that. I can imagine that. I think even when I graduated from school, I heard how valuable sales opportunities and jobs are. I imagine the cold calling, being out in Times Square, like talking to people. I imagine that probably created a lot of foundation for everything you're doing now.
Yeah, sales is everything. And I've always had sales jobs, even growing up. I would sell dolls to people on the street or give the dolls to little kids so the parents had no other choice but to buy the dolls from me on the street.
There you go.
So there's always side hustling and things like that. And it just seemed to all work. Not that I guess Wall Street is side hustling. That is what we do. So
yeah.
there's no cutting it around. So
yeah, absolutely. So I guess take me through a little bit more on what you're doing now, what your show's about, and all those awesome things you're doing to make an impact.
All right. So last year I created an Investors Coffee Shop podcast.
Okay.
And the whole idea with that, without going over rules and regulations, I can't talk about stocks or mutual funds or anything that deals with E1 asset management as a company. But we discuss investing in housing, trust accounts. Most popular podcast so far has been Pokémon.
Interesting.
That one's blown the roof off. I mean, I've got so many subscribers from Pokémon, comic books, and alternative investings. And coming up, we're going to be doing watches, and we'll be doing wine, and we'll be doing other things that go within that area. Just different avenues to invest to make money for.
Right. I imagine how powerful that is. And I think sometimes when you hear the word investing, people's minds automatically go to this, whatever that might be. It might be real estate. It might be 401k, just those things. But to kind of, it sounds like, I guess, create a more holistic definition of what that looks like. That's what you're able to do on the show.
Well, you should break up all your investments. So whether it's crypto, stocks, bonds, stocks and bonds are the most common because that's what we hear about all the time.
Right.
The most profitable is comic books, Hart, and Pokémon. Things like that have been around for a while. Pokemon's been around for over 20 years. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, you pay like $5 for a pack of card, and next thing you know, here's $1 million card in your hand. The return is incredible. Comic books, if you've been in my office next door, I've made the most of comic books. I've been collecting comics as a kid. And I actually have clients who are comic book artists and writers in that industry.
Oh, cool.
So when you go on the wall, there's pictures of me and Stan Lee, and there's people like that, and everything's signed. But those books, I would probably say I've had a 10,000 to 20,000% return for me.
Wow.
And so I talk about that. So people always think of just one way to invest, but there's many ways to invest. The first iPod, I mean, most people, if you remember when the first iPod came out, if you look today, if you find that, used, broken, they go for about $5,000.
Oh, wow.
You spent $200 to $300 back 20 years ago, not 20, 10, 15 years ago when they came out. You've quadrupled your money. And imagine if it worked. I mean, $5,000 for one that's broken, one less one that works.
Yeah.
And you can see these things on eBay and that. And There's just different ways to invest your money you just don't think about, or you're at it, you're trash. There's tons of money sitting up there. You have no idea. You just give it away or you toss it away.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so funny. I had someone on the show actually. He did he was in college. He actually does arbitrage, where he went to I think yard sales and things like that, and he looked for things. And he specifically looked for comic books because like one man trash is actually a lot of people's treasure. It turns out if you're throwing it away, but being able to kind of see that. I mean, even just you talking, I almost see investment as far as like not necessarily stocks and bonds, but basically finding something of value and being able to provide that value to somebody else and get paid for it or get some return back or something like that.
We're not even providing it to somebody else. It's just something you have.
True.
Yard sales are great. Gary Vee, who's a famous marketer, everybody knows about him. His big thing is going to yard sales.
Right.
And he does it live. He films himself on YouTube and he buys something, and then within 10 minutes he sells it for twice the money.
Right.
I've seen him actually buy something from a yard sale. I did a video, and then the lady didn't want to sell it, and he was like, all right, well, I paid you $2 for it, give me $4 and it's yours back. And she gave him the $4. I mean, instant, just like that. And all he did was just show up. Now, $2 isn't a lot, but 2 to 4, 100% is 100%, no matter how you look at it.
Right.
And that's how you have to look at these things too. Sometimes people look at comics. Yes, 90% of them will go bad. So it's not all of them they're going to go up. Same thing with baseball cards or hockey cards or any other memorabilia. Pops is a big thing now. People buy these bobblehead things.
Okay.
The majority of them do become worthless. They are toys.
Yeah.
But it's that 10%, and usually that 10% is what you don't even know you have.
Right.
And you may have one of those. So it's always worth checking out, even if you just scan eBay or Heritage Auctions or something like that. Watches, Timex watches, the old Casio computerized watches.
Yeah.
Those things go for a bundle. And
really?
We all had those as a kid, playing on the calculator. Who knew those would be worth 10 times what they are back then?
Yeah, that's crazy to kind of think. I love that you talk about that, a lot in your podcast. So is that transition into like how you help serve the clients and how you work with them?
As far as working with them, because my clients in E1, we're doing wealth management. That's mostly equities, IRAs, and things like that.
Right.
Has kind of nothing to do with that.
Right.
Now, the podcast is an add-on to what they get add on to their own selves. I don't recommend people to buy Spider-Man #1 or the Charizard Pokémon card or Wayne Gretzky rookie card. I talk about it. I discuss with professionals in that field. I'm not that professional. I interview those professionals. So every episode you're seeing somebody who's at the top of the field that I'm interviewing, so you can learn from that person. But all investments contain risk, and you have to do your own research before you do anything. Even listening to this, if I say anything that seems like you want to jump on it, you still have to do your own research. You can't take everything I say and just run to the horses with it.
Yeah, but that makes so much sense around creating that awareness. 'Cause I feel like anytime, all the information you provide, even just today and things that you do on your podcast, it provides more awareness in order to, I guess it gets redefined it to me, like investment the way that it can be. Of course, you have a quote unquote traditional investment the way that, we've learned and always known about. But I think we sometimes miss those things that might be in the top of our attic that we haven't looked at in 20 years or so.
Yeah. And those things are usually the best.
Yeah.
So, you have a lot of new things like NFTs and stuff like that are all hyped up. There's no proof of those concepts yet, and this is why you've seen the crash come and go so fast. I don't even think anyone talks about NFTs anymore. They're too embarrassed that they own it. They don't even want to admit they have it at this point. But, everyone loves to talk about the toys they had growing up, or the clothes they wore, the tennis shoes they wore, the Disney toys they had, the Star Wars toys. I mean, for the love of God, man, those things have gone up a lot.
Really?
Barbie, I mean, that movie came out. Barbie was already a hit in the collectible market. I mean, that's gone up 3x since that's come out. So those things, it's the things that bring you back to your past are generally the stuff's going to make the most money in the future. And that's why the iPod is doing so well, is because it's like, even though it wasn't that, or maybe I'm old, so it doesn't feel like it was that long a time ago. It still feels brand new in my hand. It's still exciting to go from CD tape player to that. But it brought back that part of youth I had. And now to relive that youth, I have a lot of money, and my age group tends to have a lot of money. We will pay whatever it is to just have that moment, to
Yeah.
buy that Spider-Man comic we bought as a kid, to buy that baseball card. Even if they ended up like Daryl Strawberry was my favorite.
Yeah.
His cards tanked. I absolutely took a bath on those, and that's fine. But you know what? I still will buy him because he was my favorite player in the '80s. I
Right.
loved him and Barry Bonds, and when I see those cards, I have to buy it. I don't, no longer care about the value. And because people are doing that, it's starting to push those cards back up in value because they're trying to regain their past.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It's kind of like that nostalgia that you have. It's so funny. I was taking my son to go get a burger, and they had one of these old, arcade machines, and they had Pokemon, Street Fighter, all those things that I remember from my childhood. So it's literally like this would be really cool to have, and just be able to play anytime. We find ourselves going back there for the burgers as well too, but
Yeah.
also for that experience. So it kind of reminds me a lot of that.
Yeah, pinball machines are great,
Yeah,
especially from the '80s.
yeah. I haven't played one of those
If
in a
you can
while.
find one of those that work, they're worth tons. They even now have their own museums in Las Vegas, New York City, and London, and places where you get to go still play these '80s pinball machines in original condition. If you can find that, that's like a gold mine.
Yeah.
The original Pac-Man machine, not the updated one where they can put 1,000 games on it, but
Right.
the original one back in the '80s,
Yeah.
the one we went to the arcade and threw away all the quarters we could find on the ground or the couches.
Yeah.
Tons of money.
Yeah.
Tons of it.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. No, that's awesome. So, do you feel like part of your secret sauce, you or the organization or a combination of both, is your ability to kind of, I guess, have this again? I'm gonna go back to the holistic kind of definition or perspective on the investing and what that looks like in many different ways. Do you feel like that's part of your secret sauce?
You have to be open-minded.
Mhm.
And that's the hardest thing for the average person to be is open-minded. They get stuck in a rut and
Right.
they think everything has to be one way and they won't look at anything else. I do it too all the time. Sometimes I like cars. For me, high-end cars, Mercedes and stuff like that, I think is a joke.
Mm-hmm.
I drive a Honda Fit, and it's not because of money or anything else. It's just because I can drive it just as fast as the Tesla my neighbor has.
Right. Right.
So to me, that value is not there so much. But that's me being closed-minded because that Mercedes could be a collectible down the day where really nobody's going to want my Honda Fit because they made millions of it. You could go to a junkyard and get it for free.
Right.
So there is a value there to that. But it's open-mindedness. That's it. You have to look at everything with a whole new perspective. Whatever you think you know, you really don't know. You have to go into it not knowing anything. So even going into drinking wine, that's a big thing for selected people.
Right.
It's hard to understand that it can become very valuable, but there's certain years with the grapes from like 1996 and other years, those bottles are worth a lot. And if you bring that bottle out, it'll be like $10,000. And then to the average person, like, I'm not going to spend $10,000 for a bottle of wine. Is because they want to spend $10 so they can drink it now, as opposed to that $10,000, which could turn to $25,000 in 20 years.
Right. That makes so much sense. And do you feel like that's something that open-mindedness and I guess the ability to kind of see things from different perspectives, is that something that you always had or you've been able to cultivate and then grow into?
No, I read a lot of psychology books because I'm very guilty of being closed-minded, unfortunately. When I talk to clients, there's certain things I will always close my mind to.
Right.
There's certain things I personally, because of my beliefs, I will not invest in.
Hmm.
Things like war, things that kill people or hurt people, drugs, anything that can actually hurt somebody, I will never touch.
Right.
And now, doesn't mean they're a bad investment by means. It just means I'm closed-minded there because to me,
Right.
it's not worth how much money I can make on it if people are suffering or doing things like that.
Right.
But it could be a very lucrative investment at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you feel like I almost feel like we're all closed-minded to some degree because we all have our preconceived notions?
We all are.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest thing. We're closed-minded about everything. We don't like people telling us things to do, especially in investing. We want to think we know everything.
Right.
And now with technology, you can put everything in the hand and you think you know as much as the guy who's sitting there. Like in my office where you have 6 computer screens, thousands of stocks going off at one time.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, a 20-year-old comes on, he's like, oh, I can do this. And he clicks buy and he gets like fireworks from Robin or TD Ameritrade, whatever it is, to hypes it up. And then he brags about it. He's like, well, why would anyone pay for this service when you can usually do it? And then the problem being there is that person becomes closed-minded because now he doesn't want to hear anybody else. He thinks he knows.
Right.
And he always gets lucky in the beginning. People always do. And maybe his $200 turns to $250 and he's like, this is easy.
Yeah.
And then when he loses, he ends up losing everything because he doesn't know how to handle it. And then he still won't listen to other people. And then people stop investing.
Right.
And that's that closed-mindedness.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's why I like a lot of the things that you said. Things you use a phrase I think stand the test of time. And I find like a lot of times when you are very foundational driven in terms of like how you've been able to kind of build everything, you can go back to like looking at those things that do stand the test of time so you can make more I guess better investments.
Informed decisions.
Informed decisions, yeah.
Yeah. And you got to use your gut too. I mean,
Mhm.
your gut will lead you off, but you just have to, open your mind up to different possibilities.
Yeah.
It's like dating. You have this preconceived notion
Mhm.
of I was going to say girls at the bar, but I guess we don't use bars anymore. Whatever app you guys are using nowadays. But you still have that. You look at this picture and you're swiping and you're making this decision based off of 1 second,
Right.
which is probably the worst possible thing you could ever do in your life because you put no research, no effort into it, and you just probably passed your perfect soulmate.
Right.
And it's the same thing with investing. People do it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about doing the due diligence and actually, drilling down and diving in. What they say is never crowded along an extra mile, but no one ever goes
Yes.
that extra mile. So I absolutely love that. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit and ask you for what I call a CEO hack. So this could be like an app, a book, or a habit that you have, but what's something that makes you more effective and efficient?
I would say there's so many apps out there, so that's kind of hard to say because everyone's different. The apps I use obviously don't apply to you, or don't apply to 90% of probably the listeners out here. So we'll skip that. I'll say running a business for as long as I had it, made a lot of mistakes. And the biggest one was back in '08 and '09. I had hired too many people too fast. I couldn't control the employees I had, and when the market crashed, I ended up getting sued for things I didn't even know were going on.
Mm.
And that was the problem. And since then, it's been slow growth.
Okay.
I'm trying to rebuild my business since then. And I will try not to ever make that mistake again, no matter how good a business gets.
Right.
Slower wins the race.
Yeah, absolutely. The tortoise over the hare. Do you feel like being how do you, I guess, I don't want to say manage, if that's the word that's kind of coming to that slow growth to make sure that you are kind of staying true to that. Do you have like certain checks and balances or KPIs that you're paying attention to before you make those decisions?
Yeah, so before I hire or add additional people or anything like that, I make sure I know everything that's going on. If I can't monitor and keep up with everything that's going on, then it's getting too big too fast.
Right.
And whether that means making sure I have, I don't want to give names of my employees or anything like that,
Of course.
but whether I have the right assistant on hand who can oversee everything
Right.
and report to me,
Right.
that's very important to have. Or little things like that. I just need to be able to keep my finger on the pulse. But yet I don't want to micromanage anyone. I don't want to tell people what to do.
Right.
I think people work better when they're left to their own devices.
Yeah.
And by me bossing you or saying, this is how I want you to do things. And whether it's a volunteer role because I run the Cub Scouts group, and I coach soccer and basketball, these other things, I always try to let the assistants do their own thing.
Right.
And then if it's something that could be better, then I'll just say, hey, maybe we could try this or something like that. But I let them make the decision. If you let the employees make the decision, generally they will make the right decision the majority of the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And a lot of times when we take that position and bring people on, that's what we want them to do, to be able to be, quote, for lack of a better term, autonomous, but still connected to, the overall mission, vision, and those things and those checks and balances and things that are in place. But I think so many times it's a fine line between kind of wading between those two things.
It is, but you want them to think for themselves.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who won't think for themselves. They just want to be told this is my job, and that's the only thing they want to do.
Right.
And that's great if you want to work for a Pepsi or you want to work a regular job where it's like, okay, this is your thing. That's not what works for me. I need people who want to think for themselves.
Right. That makes so much sense. And so what would you consider to be what I call a CEO nugget? It's a little bit more word of wisdom or piece of advice. I say it might be something if you were to hop into a time machine, you would tell your younger business self.
I'd like to repeat what I had just said, that growth. I mean, I know it's hard to overestimate, but I truly got screwed. It almost put me out of business.
Mm.
That was the scariest thing. And then when I opened the office in DC in 2010, I had pretty much lost everything. So at that point, the risk was, well, worst case scenarios, I'll go back to New York City. But it was that. I mean, that overgrowing so fast and losing control of everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that
I
makes
can't stress it was the scariest and dumbest thing I have ever done in my entire life. I would go back and nip that in the bud.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's some type of draw that, because I think there's almost and I always say like people define the success by sometimes the number of employees and things that you have. Do you feel like there's such a draw to kind of get to whatever X number is or whatever X destination is that you do kind of lose sight of that? People can lose sight of that when they're trying to grow and build.
They do, but you really have to ask, and that's more of a personal question.
Right.
You have to ask yourself. I realized when I had lost so much, I realized I was never going to be Goldman Sachs. I realized I was never going to be Morgan Stanley.
Mm.
And then when I got married and I had my kids, I realized I don't even want those things anymore. The growth I want is the growth that allows me to do what I want to do in life when I want to do it.
Mm.
If I want to take a vacation, I don't have to ask anyone. I just go.
Right.
But I can afford that vacation. Now, am I going to the Maldives every weekend? No. I might be going to the local lake or the beach, but I'm with my family. And I chose, for me, that was what was important, was being able to see my kids grow up. And now that they're 9 and 7, I have coached every organization. I was there at school today for Thanksgiving lunch before I met you. So I've seen everything. And then once they get to a certain point in age 13, 14, 15, once kids say, I don't really want to be around you, it's going to happen. I know that.
Right.
Then I'll go back and try to reevaluate how I want to build the business again. But for right now, for me personally, I am happy exactly where I am because I have everything I need. Could I have more? Yes. Do I need it? No, I don't. My family's the most important thing for me right now.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that word that you said, reevaluate, because I think so many times whenever we set a destination or a goal or whatever we consider success, we don't or forget the part that we can actually go and reevaluate. Like you mentioned, like after a certain period that might have been a goal, then the goal is going to change as you start to, spend more time with your family, want to cherish those years, and then it might change again. But doing that reevaluation is something that we sometimes forget, that we have to pick one lane and then only follow that lane. But in actuality, life is very fluid, and our journey in life is very fluid. So we need to adjust with that.
Correct. And it's going to change constantly.
Yeah.
Whatever you think this year, that's not what you're thinking next year.
Right.
You're a different person. It's like when you get married, the person you married is not the person who they are in 5 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then people get divorced because they're like, you're not the same. Well, no kidding, you're not the same person.
You're not either.
You've experienced different things. You
Right.
want different things now. You've grown, and you just have to learn to listen to each other and respect your differences if you're going to stay together. And it's the same in business. Business is the same thing as any form of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You have to treat it that way. For me, at this point in time, my family is the most important thing. I make enough to where my wife was luckily being able to stay-at-home mom. She just went back to work this year, or last year.
Mm-hmm.
So I made enough to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that was all I needed. I just wanted to wake up every morning, feed the kids, spend time with them, take them on 2 or 3 vacations a year, and spend as much time with them as possible.
Yeah.
They don't care how much I make at the end of the day.
Yeah.
They have never asked me how much, and 20 years from now, they're not going to even ask them.
You're right. You're right.
They're just going to say, you were here or you weren't here. That's it.
Exactly.
So in about another 5 to 10 years, I'll reevaluate because the road will split again,
Right.
and then I'll decide, well, my kids don't need me as much. Now I can go back to rebuilding this business and making it as big as I want, or whatever my heart's desire. But I've got a feeling at this time, I'm really comfortable where I am.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that I can do what I want when I want, I don't really need much more than that in life. If the car breaks down, I have money I can pay for it.
Right.
If something happens, I can pay for it. Can I fly first class everywhere? No, but that's not really important to me.
Right.
I could still go there, just maybe not first class all the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I think that goes back to kind of being able to kind of define success for yourself and what that looks like. And I think as we were talking about the cars, or whether, how much time you're spending with family or whatever it is, you get to define that success, and then you get to put a plan in place and execute for that to happen. So absolutely appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to now ask you my absolute favorite question, which is the definition of what it means to be a CEO. My goal is to have different quote unquote CEOs on this show. So what does being a CEO mean to you, Brian?
A CEO, the short answer would be is someone who is overseeing an organization that people can look up to for answers.
Mm-hmm.
Your job is to help other people grow, to mentor other people. Most CEOs, they get attitudes and they think they're the top of the world, but that's really not what your job is to do. Your job is for everybody to feel like they have an equal chance to get up to the level where you are.
Mm-hmm.
If you have lots of people fighting to be where you are, that means you're doing your job correctly, because you've made it an interesting place to be. but bossing people around is not what a CEO is. CEOs do make tough decisions. If you have multiple roads, you are the one who makes that final decision.
Right.
And if things don't work out, you're the one that has to take responsibility for it. And a lot of CEOs, you'll see, especially smaller businesses, will blame people or they'll fire employees because they think it's the employee's fault. No, it's you made a bad decision.
Right.
You need to own up to this and figure out how you're going to fix that bad decision you did. And that's all about leading. So it's allowing your employees to lead, allowing them to have an open door policy where my assistant, she tells me ideas all the time, whether they're good or not, it doesn't matter.
Right.
She knows she has the right to do it. She can call me 24 hours, anytime she wants. Any idea, doesn't matter. She'll reach out to me. She's like, hey, I got this idea.
Mm-hmm.
50% are great, 50% aren't, but you never know until you listen to it. And some of those things have changed the way I operate. And because of her, I have an investor's coffee shop. And because of her, some other things. These were her ideas. These weren't necessarily my ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it kind of speaks directly to the culture, that you haven't been able to create where, you help people to grow and in turn they feel that connection, they feel that relationship, they feel that connectedness to the organization that they want to in turn also do things to help the organization grow, help you grow. And it starts to be this really great culture that you end up creating where at the end of the day you get to serve and make a bigger and better impact for the clients you work with.
Yeah. And the employees won't leave as fast.
Yeah.
It's the biggest problem today is employees. Well, it's also entitlement too. So you have to kind of work around the entitlement. And sometimes you do have to be hard on people, like coming to work. There's now some people who think they should get paid for driving to their office.
Right.
Well, that's never happened before.
Right.
And so those things, I think, as a CEO, if you allow it to happen, great. If that's your culture, absolutely perfect.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're like Amazon, if you do what I do, where you have all these computer screens, you're heavily regulated by FINRA and the SEC, you kind of need to be in that location.
Right.
So that way things can be monitored. And if you're expecting to get paid to go do that, that's just not going to happen. So I think the CEO has to put in place that so people know right away what you're going to tolerate, what you won't tolerate.
Yeah, it makes sense. And a lot of times, I think a lot of the frustration, obviously, no one, I guess, fully planned for what ended up becoming the pandemic. But as a result of like those seismic shifts, I think sometimes CEOs, entrepreneurs, business owners, whatever leadership might be, they make those pandemic-like decisions where they are a complete pivot from what they were before. Or even people make those decisions too. But I think that's where you have a meeting of the minds, I guess, coming to terms on maybe this isn't the best fit or maybe this is a great fit. But at the end of the day, having those conversations and being kind of, I guess, open and honest about their culture is what's important.
And just tell people, explain why in a brief way. I mean, you don't have to go in paragraphs because then it sounds like you're begging the person.
Yeah.
You just, if you need them to be at the office, you say, look, I need you at the office because this is what we do. Your stuff is here and this is where it's done.
Right.
And that's it. If you don't really, there's a lot of jobs you don't need to be at the office. And because of that, CEOs are happy because they're saving money on rent now.
Right.
They don't have to pay so much office. They're like, yes, stay at
Right.
home.
Yeah.
No, I don't have to pay for anything. You're paying your own electricity. You're paying all this stuff. That's all stuff I don't have to pay anymore.
Right.
Happy with it.
Right.
So you just have to look at both sides of the pendulum and see how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes back to your overall culture, what you're trying to build. So, Brian, truly appreciate that definition and perspective. Of course, I appreciate your time even more. So, what I want to do now is pass you the mic, so to speak, just to see if there's anything additional you can let our readers and listeners know. And of course, how best people can get a hold of you, subscribe to your podcast, find out about all the awesome things you're working on.
Yeah, so I'm the CEO and host of Investors Coffee Shop. We're on all major platforms. So you can see us on Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. If you like everything you hear, you can send comments. All you can ask some of your questions live on the air when we do those. And also, if you're interested in wealth management, you can check me out on E1 Asset Management, e1am.com.
Awesome. Make it even easier. We'll have the links and information in the show notes as well too. So subscribe to find out about E1 as well too. So thank you so much again, Brian. I hope you have a phenomenal rest of the day.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.